Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and happy Friday, one and all. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller. Tonight is April 3rd, 2015, and I'll be taking you through the forecast this evening. As always, you can keep up to date with our current products online at arh.noaa.gov, and that'll bring you to the entire Alaska view. You can also call in our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391, and we're on social media as well, Facebook at NWS Alaska, on Twitter at NWS Alaska, use the hashtag AKwx, and on YouTube later on after this program you'll find this show and a couple other segments to check out. So taking a look at our tonight's hazardous weather map, you can see out towards the Bering Strait is where we have our one and only hazard this evening. That's in effect for St. Lawrence Island and the coastal areas of the Bering Strait. Starts at 10 p.m. tonight and goes until noon on Saturday. And it is for strong winds. We'll be seeing winds anywhere from 30 to 45 miles an hour sustained out of the south-southeast with gusts as high as 55. So be advised of that if you're traveling out in those areas. And also tonight, for those that enjoy stargazing and looking up at our sky conditions, we will be experiencing a total lunar eclipse. And it's going to be a very brief lunar eclipse tonight from 3:54 until 4:06, so only 12 minutes for the totality where the entire disk is eclipsed. But nonetheless, it will take place for several minutes, and you can see here the timeline forecasted for this eclipse throughout the night tonight. So if you're interested in that, take a look outside. We should have clear skies over much of the state, so there should be good viewing conditions and fairly warm temperatures as well. And speaking of that, let's take a look at our satellite and we'll see exactly what kind of weather we've got going on for the next couple days. Over the Bering Sea, our low pressure system, our first of several low pressure systems that we'll talk about tonight, is making its way towards the west coast. Precipitation just to the west of the Pribilof Islands at this time and just starting to move its way into Unalaska Bay. And colder air wrapping in behind this system in the form of some snow showers and mixed with a little bit of rain at times out towards the western Aleutians. And this is just going to start to set up our more active pattern into the next couple days here as we see systems move quickly off the eastern Russia coast and on the way towards the Bering coast. Taking a look a little bit closer to mainland Alaska, I'll step over here so you can see our low spinning down in the Gulf of Alaska. Weak area of low pressure now is slowly winding down. This area is mainly just surrounded by a few showers coming around the backside with some colder air and bringing a little bit of precipitation into the coastlines there. And then as we look towards the west, again, here is our bigger story for tonight and into the next couple days is this frontal system here. Lots of high, cold cloud tops associated with this with good upper level support, making that appear very bright on the satellite imagery. And you can see here one more time, putting it into motion. It's a very quick mover from west to east, draping a cold front through much of the Aleutians and bringing some warmer air into Bristol Bay. And that, again, will spread some precipitation into coastal areas as we get into the overnight hours. So looking at our surface maps, again, here is our low pressure system at 998 millibars, and that is bringing a fairly wide area of precipitation, mostly in the form of snow, but it is mixing with rain as you get towards the Aleutians, as that warmer air associated with the warm front is punching up from the southwest towards the northeast. And that system will slowly weaken as we go into the overnight hours, but down at 998 millibars now, so a respectable system. As we get towards southeast Alaska, again, there we can see our low pressure system that is moving away from the state, and it is just bringing a few lingering rain showers to the coastal areas, and then a little bit of light snow as you get towards inland areas of Canada. Just over by Northway and along the Alcan border, we can see some snow showers associated with the kind of a decaying frontal boundary there. Now it's just a trough of low pressure, but some snow showers have been plaguing that area for the last couple days. And then with gusty offshore winds across much of the coastline areas, we have developed a weak area of lower pressure right off the coastline, and we'll see how that develops into the overnight hours. Stepping into tonight's forecast, you can see our front starting to work its way from west to east, again, rather quickly, down to 996 millibars, so strengthening just a little bit, and that precipitation should start to reach the coastline. We're expecting mainly snow, but we could see some rain mix in for areas along the coastline and a little bit further south where some of that warmer air is confined. As we look towards the Alaska Peninsula there, we see some of that rain-snow mix in the pink, and then down towards the southern portions of the Alaska Peninsula, things should turn over to all rain, and we start to see the boundary, die off as we move into the Gulf of Alaska. Further out west, we'll see our next storm system starting to take shape that we will watch over the next couple days. There's our area of low pressure that develops in the Gulf, again, just bringing some of that stronger north winds through those bays and passes for mariners, and our weak area of snow showers still along the Alcan border. Our low down in southeast Alaska will continue to weaken while it brings some just isolated pockets of rain showers to the southeast portion of the state. On into Saturday now, we can see our area of low pressure continues to move away from the mainland and from southeast Alaska. Showers should be diminishing, and actually some partly cloudy skies for the area for much of the day for Saturday. Over towards Kodiak Island, we have a new low pressure system that develops off of this system from the eastern Bering. We call that a triple point low. This one is not going to be much of a player across the mainland as it quickly moves off following the other track of the previous system down to the south-southeast, and will just bring some showers mainly to the coast or the marine areas. And then looking back towards the west there, we see our low pressure system down to 991 millibars, and this one is also going to track quickly along the Aleutian chain and over into eastern portions of the Aleutians, and then eventually towards the coastal areas, and we'll look at that here on Sunday. Some fog underneath the ridge that develops in between these two areas of low pressure, and we'll see that from the Aleutians up to the Pribilof Islands. And then precipitation, again, mainly in the form of snow, should start to taper off to showers as we go through the day on Saturday as this occluded boundary starts to break apart. And on into Sunday now, we can see, again, our area of low pressure from the western Aleutians making its way very quickly to the northern portion of the Bering Sea towards the Bering Strait. And this is where we have some of those stronger winds that we're expecting with that advisory along the coast there. And we see a rain-snow mix, again, with warmer air starting to make its way back into inland areas along the Bristol Bay area and in towards the Kuskokwim Delta. Over the Gulf of Alaska, that weak low pressure continues to move off to the east and southeast, just bringing rain showers to coastal areas. We do have a chance for this cold front to bring some snow showers to Cook Inlet regions on Sunday morning. Just isolated showers expected at this time, but of course now that we're into April, we're starting to bring snow back into the forecast for much of south central. And so we'll see, not expecting much in accumulation as the ground is very warm, but we do see a chance for some snow Sunday morning. And then 1,008 millibar low pressure along this stationary boundary that continues to just be hung up there along the Alcan border. Let's take a look at temperatures from southeast Alaska and the rest of south central Alaska that were as of 4 p.m. this afternoon. We can see high temperature up in Skagway. The warm spot there was 56 degrees, mostly in the upper 40s, mid to upper 40s, and 51 there at Petersburg. Off towards south central Alaska, Cordova came in at 51 degrees. Valdez was 48 and 50 degrees for Homer. Down a little bit closer towards Kodiak Island, 47 degrees and upper 40s for much of Bristol Bay. As we get towards the interior portion of the state, 36 degrees there for Northway, and Fairbanks was sitting at 33 degrees. And then towards the northern portion of the Brooks Range, we saw single-digit temperatures for highs today, and all the way down to 0 and just below 0 along the Arctic coast with Barrow at 1 degree. Nome came in at 15 degrees, and we saw mainly teens from the coastal areas once you got south of the Seward Peninsula. Taking a look at Bristol Bay area now in the southwest portion onto the Aleutians, mainly low 40s to upper 30s for that area. Bethel came in at 40 degrees, and it was 45 degrees in Talkeetna. As we got into the Aleutian chain, anywhere from mid-30s to mid-40s out towards Cold Bay and Sand Point, 49 degrees at Dutch Harbor, and then 46 and 41 at Atka and Adak respectively. Not until you got into the Pribilofs did you get into the upper 30s, and Shimia came in at 37. Taking a look at tonight's temps, we expect lows, again, very seasonable, mid to upper 30s for southeast Alaska. South Central will see anywhere from low to upper 20s, and clear skies expected once again, keeping those temperatures on a pretty big diurnal curve. And then as we get towards the interior portion of the state, starting to drop towards the teens, up towards the Brooks Range, single digits expected up there, and along the Arctic coast anywhere from 0 to 10 below. Along the Seward Peninsula, single digits climbing to the teens, and southwest Alaska can expect low 20s to around 30 degrees. For the Aleutian chain, anywhere from the mid 30s to lower 40s. And then tomorrow's high forecast for Easter Saturday, we're looking for mainly upper 40s to low 50s for much of southeast Alaska. Over the south central portion of the state, expect temperatures again fairly mild into the mid to upper 40s. And for southwest Alaska, mid 30s to around 40. As we get towards the interior, near 40 degrees for many locations, including Fairbanks. Up along the Brooks Range, anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees, and not until we get to the Arctic coast do we see our high temperatures get near 0 to just below 0. And then along the Bering Sea coast, we'll see anywhere from 15 to 25 degrees, 27 at Nome. Taking a look at the flying weather now, we have MVFR conditions associated with those weak areas of low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska. And there along our frontal boundary is where we're expecting the worst conditions. Instrument flight rules for areas along that front and especially along the western coast of the state. Taking a look at our passes now, Anaktuvik should be VFR in the center of the state there under some weak flow. Adigan as well with VFR conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill there along the west side of the Alaska Range will go from VFR to MVFR as that front approaches. Rainy will do much the same. Windy Pass will be VFR, not windy conditions, fairly light winds there. Isabel will be VFR. Mentasta will be MVFR. Tanita will be VFR. Portage will be VFR. And Chilkoot and White Pass will go from MVFR conditions with some low clouds improving to visual flight rules later in the day. For the freezing level into tomorrow, we expect tomorrow morning the surface line just along the coastline there and then into Bristol Bay, up just north of the Pribilof Islands there. And some of that warmer air you can see being pulled up with that system along the along Bristol Bay's area, with freezing levels climbing to about 6,000 feet near Sand Point and 2,000 feet near the northern portion of Bristol Bay and Cape Newenham. And then again, another surge of warm air bringing freezing levels up to 8,000 feet as you get south of the Aleutian chain. Over the Gulf of Alaska, expect mainly 2,000 foot freezing levels across the entire Gulf with fairly benign temperature advection there. Looking at our flying forecast for tomorrow's icing, you can see that pocket of light showers is creating some light icing from 5,000 feet and above. Down in the Gulf, a little bit of light to isolated moderate icing above 7,000 feet. And then along our frontal boundary, 6,000 feet and then down to 5,000 feet, just light to isolated moderate as that front falls apart tomorrow. Above 4,000 feet for our new system coming in from southwest from the North Pacific. Looking at the jet stream, we can see about 125 knots screaming there out of the Kamchatka area, moving up over this ridge of high pressure to 95 knots, and then diving back down, supporting this area of low pressure at 105 before it trails off into central United States. Up over this ridge of high pressure, well north of the state, up in the Arctic, we see 40 knots climbing up over it, and then 50 knots coming back down. As we look at tomorrow's 9,000 foot winds, we can see our strongest winds confined just south of this area of low pressure at about 60 knots, mainly southwesterly flow coming over this ridge and becoming more northwesterly as we get in towards the Gulf of Alaska, 20 to 35 knots around this area of low pressure. Out over the mainland, we see fairly light flow from the majority and just 40 knots becoming 25 knots wrapping around this area of low pressure. At 3,000 feet, a little bit stronger flow expected here as we see a low-level jet develop at about 50 to as much as 80 knots there, so we are looking for some turbulence in those areas, especially along the mountainous terrain, and otherwise fairly light flow through much of the state. As we get into tomorrow's turbulence, there we see our worst conditions below 4,000 feet. We do have occasional widespread moderate expected, especially as you interact with terrain, and then below 5,000 feet as you interact with that frontal boundary in the Bering Strait. And we'll be right back with the marine forecast. Stay tuned.
Good evening, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. Our guest this evening is Judge Greg Miller. Greg is a Superior Court judge, and he's a very experienced pilot. Greg's been on the program before and has had some really good things to share with us. To give you an idea of his experience, he's had his pilot license for over 40 years, is a CFI, MEI, and CFII. And he's also a glider pilot. In his early flying career, he flew as a fire bomber, piloting such aircraft as the PV-2 Harpoon and P-2V. Currently, he exercises his CFI credentials by flying BFRs, and he's long been a part of the Iditarod Air Force. Judge Miller, welcome back.
Thank you.
Let's talk about your Alaska flying. This is your 7th Iditarod?
I believe it's
Sixth or
the seventh, 6th or 7th.
Any lessons from the latest?
Dress warmly. It was pretty cold, minus 38 when we woke up, and engines don't run as you're used to it, and all your gauges don't look quite right, and you have to realize your plane really isn't falling out of the sky. It just likes the warmer weather a little bit. But the weather was the weather plus the newness of the terrain was an issue, I think, probably for all of us. There's about 30 of us who do the Iditarod Air Force flying. And this race was a different route, as everybody knows, because of the lack of snow down here in Anchorage. We moved it on up to Fairbanks and then down the Yukon. And we're used to half of that route from Ruby on down Galena, Koyukuk, etc. But the first half around Fairbanks and Manly and Tanana was all new to us. And at the same time it was new, we had ice fog. Well, we don't get ice fog down here. And it was a tough combination. We had to tread carefully, cautiously, new area coupled with different weather. And so that was probably the biggest challenge, certainly, for me.
Oh, a couple of questions. Did you, because I flew out of Eielson for a couple of years, did you end up creating any of your own ice fog when aircraft would take off, or not enough?
I don't think so. The operations were going hot and heavy through Fairbanks. That's a busy airport. And there was a pretty doggone good wind during part of it. And so what we were seeing, I call ice fog, frankly, it was just sometimes crummy visibility. You can call it what you want.
Right. One of the amazing things I remember when I was at Eielson, it would be absolutely clear and 50, and the KC-135, water injected, would take off and it would go 0-0.
I've heard those stories. We didn't have that.
Yeah.
We just had an area where you could see for miles ahead, gee, it looks like it's getting crummier up there, and you get closer, you know, you wonder, is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? And you kind of always crossing your finger, and it would get better. We were never, I mean, we were flying VFR, but you're really keeping your fingers crossed. Fine line sometimes when you don't know an area. Does it get better around this corner or worse? So,
you had mentioned a great saying about the 2,000 mile runway, the Yukon River.
Yeah, yeah, it's a nice, with a trail. It's all matted down. The mushers have gone through, or the trail breakers, and that makes for some pretty safe flying. It really does, in its own unique way.
Now, you still have your 180?
I do, yeah, that's what I fly. Usually I'm on straight skis, and for this one we were all airport to airport to airport, so I went back to wheels.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Any other lessons that you shared?
Well, there was two things. I think that with the Iditarod, we're always trying to up the game every year for safety, and how to find that objective analysis of when is the weather or whatever the conditions might be, when is it getting past your personal minimums. That's difficult, and that's the thing that we strive to achieve the most with our pre-race planning in the months before. I think it's most difficult for a pilot in the air to say that line that we all say we won't cross is still in front of us, instead of, uh-oh, you've passed it already. You've violated your own personal minimums. And so that objective standard is something we're always trying to come up with. There's different ways to do that. Aviation, baseball, 3 strikes, you're out. You know, you rate the factors that are going against you for this particular flight, whether it's fatigue or weather or new airport, any of those things. But I think we did that even more this time because of the new terrain and weather for us. But that's a very difficult thing to do, and I think that it's difficult for pilots to do when they're up in the air, and I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that people on the ground, like dispatchers, are in a better position to do that. And with the Iditarod, we have those dispatchers.
Right.
We're not 135, but we utilize 135 standards
Right.
in that respect and many others. And it's a great standard. And some of those things we shopped around with other 135 operators to find out, what do you do? What do you do to figure out visibility? Are you really estimating, is that really 3 miles visibility in front of you, or is it less?
Let's do
things
this,
like that.
because we've run out of time.
Okay.
Actually, I want to get you on to do 2 things. I want to talk more about that issue,
Okay.
because I think could be very instructive. So maybe we've got 2 programs here. We've got that, finish your thoughts there, but also I want to get you back on and talk about something completely different, and that is flying from Hawaii to the West Coast.
In a Bonanza.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program, and we'll get Greg back on to finish his thoughts on what amounts to risk assessment and how they handle it in the Iditarod. So until next time, fly safe.
Welcome back to the show. Let's dive right into the marine forecast. Sea surface temperatures as of this afternoon, we can see basically right up against St. Paul and St. George Island. That's where our 0 line, and started to get warmer from there as we work down towards the southwest. As we expect those several systems to make their way from the west to the east rather quickly across the Bering, some of this warmer air will mix in just north of the continental shelf, push some of that warmer water up, and should keep the sea ice and the sea surface temperatures away and north of the Pribilof Islands. And then as we look over the Gulf of Alaska, again, slowly warming temperatures throughout much of the area with anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. Taking a look at our sea ice now, and there is that edge just from Cape Newenham stretching out towards the Pribilofs and a little bit further to the southwest. What we expect for the sea ice for the next couple days with these systems moving through is basically it's going to be a very fluid motion. It's going to break up a little bit along the edge, recycle up to the north and west, and then cycle back down from the northwest to the south and southeast. And that'll just continue for the next couple days with these stronger storm systems. Not a lot of change expected on its southward extent. On to marine forecast for southeast on Saturday. Fairly good conditions for marine travel, expecting north winds 10 to 15 knots for the inner passageways, seas just 2 to 3 feet, and then out over the Gulf of Alaska anywhere from east to northeast, and eventually becoming a little bit more variable towards Yakutat, and about 10 to 15 knots with seas coming from 7 feet down to 5 feet there on the open waters. Into Sunday now, we see north winds 10 to 5 knots, even less than yesterday, even less than Saturday, and then down to 10 knots out of the northwest near Dixon Entrance. Seas on the order of 2 feet. The open waters expect fairly benign conditions there, southeast to northeast flow, 10 knots, and seas about 4 feet. For south central Alaska, for Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound, expect northeast winds at about 10 knots with that offshore flow continuing on Saturday. And then most of the rest of the region will be variable winds at about 10 to 15 knots until you get down near Kodiak where we have that developing low. We'll see 20 knots out of the northwest for Shelikof and 15 out of the southwest just south of the island there. Seas anywhere between 3 to 5 feet. For Sunday, expect conditions to improve for much of the area, remain constant around 10 knots variable winds and 2 to 4 foot seas, anywhere for the open waters there, expecting 4 foot seas. Down towards Kodiak Island, expect westerly winds at 20 knots, 7 knots, and for Shelikof and southern Cook Inlet, westerly to northwesterly winds 10 to 15 and seas 2 to 4 feet. For the Alaska Peninsula, we'll see winds around that low pressure system anywhere from 25 to 30 knots and mainly out of the west and southwest. As we get into Sunday, expect southwest to southerly flow. Seas will be 5 to 11 feet north of the chain and 8 to 13 feet south of the chain as we see things start to ramp up a little bit as our next low system moves in. Out over the Aleutians, we have conditions starting to decrease, winds increasing 25 to 35 knots with seas on the order of 7 to building to 11 feet southeast winds. As we get a little bit towards the central Aleutians and eastern Aleutians, expect southerly flow to become westerly 25 to 30 knots and seas will be building from 7 to about 9 feet. Our worst conditions of the weekend are expected on Sunday for much of the Aleutian chain. Storm force winds out of the southwest in support of that next low pressure system, and we can expect seas to be building from as much as 15 to 21 feet as you get towards the central and western Aleutians. On for the west coast now for Saturday. expect winds 25 to 40 knots, generally southwest as we go towards the mainland, and then becoming easterly just north of that area of low pressure up near St. Lawrence Island, and seas about 12 feet near the Pribilofs and becoming 6 feet closer to the ice edge, with some freezing spray near the ice edge. On Sunday now, expect winds to come south to more of an easterly direction, 30 to 45 knots now, with the 45 gale force near storm force winds confined a little bit further south near the Pribilof Islands. Seas 7 feet along the ice edge, becoming 17 feet as you get a bit farther south. And then for the Arctic coast, easterly flow will dominate around that area of low pressure, 20 to 30 knots with the strongest winds north of Kaktovik and just north of the Seward Peninsula. And then improving conditions as winds come down, 20 to 30 knots, but again, keeping things out of the east on Sunday. So recapping tonight's forecast, we can see our area of low pressure just approaching the west coast, starting to bring some precipitation to Bristol Bay and to areas along the west coast there. And our area of low pressure down in the southeast portion of the Gulf is going to start to slide further away from the state, and we expect improving conditions through the Gulf of Alaska. As we get into Saturday now, we see our area of low pressure that develops near Kodiak, and that will not be much of a player for many of the mainland areas. But we do have that snow showers just beginning to taper off now on Saturday from our first frontal system. And here is our next frontal system right on its heels, coming quickly across the Bering with low pressure down to 991 millibars. Southeast Alaska will see improving conditions as this area of low pressure continues to slide away. And then as we look at Easter Sunday's forecast, that area of low pressure finally makes its way into the Bering Sea and up along the west coast of Alaska, bringing a mix of rain and snow with another large swath of warm air. We do have a light chance of some light snow along the Cook Inlet region and light snow showers continuing for the Alcan border. Thanks for watching the show this evening. I'm Mike Ottenweller.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.